Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Wanted to discuss today traction. We all want it, you never get enough of it. I opted for a Torq Masters, which used to be called, I believe, Aussie Lockers. I don't know if it still is, but Torq Masters Lunchbox Locker for the front of the JK. And so I'll be putting that in and walking through those steps to do so. So once you have the tire off, a couple things you need to pay attention here for: brake lines, and this is your ABS sensor line. So these two are going to come off separately, because what we'll do is we'll take these two bolts here, this one down on the other side. They are 21 millimeter bolts, so that's going to take off your entire caliper. So once you have these out of the way, this out of the way, this out of the way, is when we'll start working on the axle shaft and wheel bearing. Now, we should be able to take these out at the same time. Shouldn't have to disconnect the axle shaft from the wheel bearing. So we should be able to pull that all out as one. So we'll get to that point. Right now, let's get this caliper off and the caliper bracket and start working our way through the disc and ABS. Let's get these off. Now we're going to separate these so that when we take off this rotor, or this caliper as I was discussing, we can tie it up out of the way without affecting the ABS line. Watch out for your pads. You see the pads are inside. And actually, my pads are in pretty good shape. So we're just going to tie this up and out of the way. If you were doing a brake job, now would be a good time to replace your pads and your rubbers. Okay, so at this point, we have the rotor off, we have the caliper and caliper bracket off. For those understanding where we're at, this is your axle shafts and your U-joint in between. Your axle shaft goes on in, all the way into your center. People call it the pumpkin, the differential, the whatever you want to call it. So what we're trying to do at this point is, you've got this inner C here. You have this outer C. That's what's hooked together by your ball joints. What we're going to do is slide this axle shaft, U-joint, and wheel bearing as one unit all the way out through the outer C. So next up that we have to take care of is we have to get this wheel bearing off. And in order to get the wheel bearing off, first thing we have to do, I don't know if you can see it there or not, but you can see there is where your ABS goes in. So there is a very small Allen wrench bolt on that. So we'll take that off, and then once we pull that out, it's a little jimmying. Once you get that off, then you can get your ABS out of the way, and we'll start working on the wheel bearing. There we go. Nope. Just broke mine off. See if you can see this here. There's 3 bolts holding in your wheel bearing. These are 12-point bolts, and I believe, if I'm correct, is a 13 millimeter 12-point socket. Very rusty, so this is going to take a little work for me, but hopefully we'll get through there, get these off, and I'll show you a little trick for pushing this wheel bearing out, because this wheel bearing is essentially kind of pressed into the outer C, so we're going to need to push it this way in order to get it out. So let's work on these, we'll go from there. So, as you saw, shit happens, right? So the ABS sensor broke off into the wheel bearing. And so in doing that, trying to get out that ABS sensor out of the center of the wheel bearing, not having much luck at it. And to be honest, I'm a little concerned that whatever debris would come out if I drilled it out is going to be down inside the wheel bearing. So I'm just going to replace the wheel bearing. Jeep's got 130,000 miles on it, so it can use the wheel bearings anyway. So I'm going to replace the wheel bearing and the speed sensors. Again, these are the kind of things that happen when you get to a project, especially these Jeeps that are, you know, going on 9, 10, 11 years old and have a lot of surface rust on them. So I wanted to show you what I've done to this point so that we can work from here. Stopping to have a little drink before I get going some further. So let's see what we can come up with. I got the 2 bolts out. There's one down here and one up here. Those were those 12-point 13mm bolts that hold in the wheel bearing. You see the holes here and the holes here. So I got these 2 out. I have the other one on the other side. These are in a triangle shape on the wheel bearing. Have the other one loosened up. And this is the trick I'm going to show you to get this wheel bearing. Obviously you can tell if everything else is rusted and breaking off that this wheel bearing is probably in pretty good into this right here. This is going to, what I'm going to do in order to push this out, this bolt isn't all the way out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go turn the steering wheel. That's going to force this up against the inner C. And in doing so, push outward on the wheel bearing. If all goes well, it should break this wheel bearing loose. All right, hopefully you got to see that split right there. That is our wheel bearing. The light's up here out of the way. Take note of your brake backing plate. Caliper, rotor, the caliper bracket go on the back. That's how this opening has to go, is where the caliper is. I myself, and I've seen a lot of people, will put this on backwards to the front, just not paying attention. It will, in fact, go on. It's not right till you go to put your calipers on and realize it's wrong. So, pro tip there. All right, let's give it a little here. All right. Axle shaft. This will be the long side axle shaft. There you go. All right, so we got the axle shaft out. I wanted to make a note. I'm going to take the wheel bearing off of the axle shaft. When I pulled it out, it came out as one piece. That said, there is a nut that holds the outer stub shaft, so the short side of the passenger side axle shaft, onto the wheel bearing. And so you have to take a nut off. That nut is an 1 3/8 inches. So 1 3/8 inch socket. This is actually a 3/4 socket with an adapter to a 1/2 inch. So I am fortunate enough that I have a Milwaukee Impact that takes everything off of everything. So always nice to have the right tools for the job. So all right, that said, axle shaft, wheel bearing, I'm going to separate those two. It's just banging on a hammer a couple times, but we should get that done, and I will have the passenger side done. And then I'll do the same thing to the driver's side. Hopefully nothing comes apart this time, and keep moving forward. Then we'll move on to the differential. We've got the Jeep apart. It's kind of a wreck. Hopefully you can see that. This is what I'm working with. Nothing underneath in the front, and both sides are completely torn apart. So that said, next step is going to be taking the differential cover off and draining the oil out of it, and getting that center section out. So we'll start working on that. Okay, so what I've done here is I've taken all of the differential cover bolts off except for the top one. I've loosened it, but I've not taken it off, because at this point what I'm going to do, this is being held on right now by RTV sealant. We're going to crack this just a little bit, get it to start draining out first, and then we will finish taking this off. This just helps to kind of keep everything going down rather than taking everything off and having it leak everywhere all over you and not down into the drain pan. So there's usually a small section back here that's just cut out enough on the diff housing that you can get a screwdriver in. Just take a little bit of work. It's nice and easy. We can pry it open. Diff fluid. In my opinion, one of the worst smelling fluids on your Jeep. So you see here again, I left this bolt in so that I don't have to worry about that diff cover falling off, and this can now drain out. When it's done draining, we can take the diff cover off and minimize the mess. All right, last bolt's out. Now you're gonna want to tilt this back just a little bit. There we go. And there, my friends, is the inside of your differential. It's your center section. People call it the case. Cross pin. What we're going to be doing is removing this. We're going to be putting the locker right in the center of that case. Take these two bolts out and these two bolts out. Bearing caps. I'm pulling this out. Actually pulling it out and down, and then we'll start working on this piece. Okay, so one thing to mention as I'm getting ready to take these off, these bearing caps are set to each side of this. You don't want to switch them. And I even go so far as to use the same bolt in the same hole. So when you pull these off, you want to make sure that this bearing cap, you know, is the right side, you know which part's the top, you know which part's the bottom, because this thing is milled to fit exactly as it should. Have people swapped them? I'm certain they have. I don't. I try and put everything back the way that it came from the factory. So that said, we're going to take these off. I'm going to take one bolt off at a time, and I'm going to know which spot it came from, top or bottom, and I'm also going to know how that bearing cap goes back on the orientation. So let's see if we can get these off. Not too hard. Another thing of this, once you get all four of these loosened, depending on whether or not it's been messed with before, you know, the age of the vehicle, there's a million different things, your case may come out very easily. Most times it doesn't, but just be prepared. Scoot you over just a little bit. So that's why I'm just I'm loosening these all as one, and then I can take them out while holding on to it. Okay, so I have these separated. Another thing, this is just thoughts as you're going through here. So when I go to pull this out, this could be shimmed and have shims on either side in order to maintain its maintain the gear pattern that was originally set up with from the factory, or again if you had aftermarket. So when you go to pull this out, there may be shims on, and actually usually is shims on one or the other, and those shims need to stay in the same orientation, same side. You can't get them mixed up. Can't put one on the other or vice versa. They're thickness shims, and so they're specific to how this was put in. So I'm gonna tug on this and see if I can get it. So see there, we got it to come out. Now here's where we have to pay attention. Make sure we do or don't have any shims if this was set up. We don't want to take those chances. So there's a bearing race, same thing. That bearing race is going specific to that bearing. I get it out. There's that shim. I think I'm gonna take this out the top. So this shim was over here, so I'm just gonna have to go back. Alright, so you can see on this side, here's the shim that came out of this side. We got to keep that shim passenger side. Alright, so as I was saying here, you see all these flat spots that are milled out. Those bearing caps are specific to here. So when they were milled out, holes line up directly. And then another thing to note, again, if you've never been in here, this is your pinion. So when they're trying to sell you a ring and pinion, or you're saying your pinion shot or loose or whatever happens to be, this is what they're talking about. This is connected to your drive shaft. As this turns, the rotational turn turns your ring gear. We're gonna get this ring gear and case on the bench and start putting the locker in it so we can put it all back together. Okay, so got it a little cleaned up, get some of the grease off of it, and wanted to walk through this a little bit. So you have your bearings here, your case bearings, and just understand that while we're working with this, you need to be careful of these. Obviously you don't want to damage these because these are going back in. These are actually pressed on. It's not like you can pull them off. These are your spider gears on the inside. This is what we're going to be taking out, and we're going to replacing with the Lunchbox Locker. Torq Masters, it used to be called Aussie Locker. Locker will go in this place. So we have to take the ring gear off, and then we're going to get the cross shaft out, and then those spider gears should fall out. So just the same as we were doing with the bearing caps, where we kept the positions. We also need to keep the position of the ring gear on the case. So remember, when the gears were set up by the factory, they were set up with this ring gear attached in a specific position. So what I'm going to do is mark this so that I know when I put this ring gear back on, it's on in the same spot it was on before. So what we're going to do is we're just going to mark this, and again, it doesn't really matter how you mark it as long as you yourself know what it is. I've just got it. I always use a silver Sharpie. I use that for a lot of things when I'm cutting, grinding, whatever it happens to be. Again, I'm just trying to make sure I make enough mark so that I know when I go to put this back on where it should go. Some people will take it and etch it. Let's get these off. Ring gear should fall right off. Set them off to the side, work way through. So, ring gear. Take my case. There you go. So there's the ring gear. Not my concern at the moment. My concern, however, is getting these out. Again, these are your spider gears, cross shaft. The cross shaft is held in by a pin, and this is just a punch pin on these JK models and the JK cases. So you need to get a punch and punch this out. Now, push from this side out this side, and then when I push it back in, I punch from this side back in. So here we go. Be careful, don't hit your bearings. And there we have it, our cross pin. And we'll keep that off to the side. All right. Moment of truth. See if we can get our shaft out here. Of course, I'm attempting to pull this out with greasy hands and no leverage. Cross shaft. It's all downhill from here. Go. All I'm doing here is spinning this so that we can get our spider gears out. So we got the spider gears out. Again, just taking note, some of these cases will actually have these shims on each side. All right, let's get this all cleaned up so we have another clean workspace, and we'll get to installing the locker. Okay, so we're at the point now where we can start assembling the locker into our case. So we've removed the ring gear, we've removed the spider gears in the center of the case, and now we are left with just a bare case with our bearings. And this is the Aussie locker. Company is called Torq Masters. I generally, when somebody just says Aussie locker, I know it's the Aussie locker. This is a Lunchbox Locker. You have two side, you have your side gears that are going to be replaced. And in that, how this works essentially is so this is where your cross shaft will be inside. But you can see here that what happens is under power, you engage. In the front, when it goes under power, what happens is these slide in and turns. Both axle shafts would then be locked and you have full power. So even if one tire goes up in the air, you are still turning all 4 wheels, as opposed to a limited slip or an open differential. When you lose power on one wheel, it slides 100% of the time. This is not the case. Once these lock in and it's under torque, you'll spin both tires, and that's what gives you the traction you need. So we're going to slide this into here and go through that process. All right. Take these apart, and then how this is held in again, get the box out of the way. These pins will actually fit into these holes. You got small pins and springs here, and so what that does is allows, these are on your side gears, and these pins push this out, so when it's under torque, it pushes this into this. This doesn't come into this. This actually comes in to the side gear and locks in. So what we're going to do, the Torque Masters has said, remember we had these thrust washers come out when we pulled this apart. We are no longer going to use these. So they've redesigned it. They have their own washers that will go on the outside. So we will just going to put a little bit of grease on here, not a lot, but enough so that everything sticks together, essentially, is what you're after. You don't want the pieces coming in and out and flying around. So see, now it won't come off. Do the same thing for the other one, just a little bit, not much. I didn't even use all I had there, so spin that around. The other thrust washer. Again, make sure you have a clean working surface. I cleaned all this up before we got started. This is so you don't want a bunch of junk inside your case and then it goes back in when you put it back together. All right, so as we get moving here, so I'm gonna go ahead and put these in here. Got one there. You see I put one in there, and I'm gonna put one on the opposite side. There. So now all we have to do is start, tell you what I'm gonna do here, since I know this is gonna lean over. We'll do the same on this piece. Put just a little bit of grease here, and that should help it stay in place. That back in. As long as you don't ding it, it shouldn't move. All right. Okay, so now we got to get this in. So they got flat spots on each side. You see that, flat, flat. We got one in. Slide this other one in. So you see we've got, that's where our cross pin is going to go. Okay, so what you can see here, I've turned it around, make it a little easier to see and to do for that matter. So I don't know if you can see down here, so this would be our cross pin hole. And right here is a long cutout, and then there's actually a pin hole down there. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take these pins, and there's a little nipple on the end of them. That's gonna be facing upwards towards where we're gonna want the spring, all right? So you see there, what'll happen is I'm gonna insert a spring in there, and it will actually start pushing this up to each side, and then so there'll be a spring and a pin there. We're gonna do that for 4 sides. There's 4 of them. All right, so have our pin in here. We got that little nipple facing upward because that nipple is actually gonna be basically a guide for this spring. So I'm gonna raise this up. Let's see if I can do this with my fingers. Slide that pin in over that guide. It's gonna go down and in. So, make sure it's all the way seated in there. There it goes. That's what it's going to look like. We're going to do the other side. Okay. So, you see everything spinning together. So now I have these other 2. We're going to flip this over. Do the same thing on this side. I'm going to put this pin, nipple, slide it in here. Hopefully it slides into, see how it slid right in there? So now we can take this, maybe just a little easier. I'm gonna try with the screwdriver this time. See if this makes it any easier. Watch your fingers. Try not to damage this. Oh yeah, much easier. Push it in there. There you go. Spin this around now that we got 3 out of the 4. Last one. Make sure the little nipple up. Slide it in there. Slides down in the hole. Our spring and flathead screwdriver. Make sure it's in there. And we have a locker. So there you go. So now what we're going to do is we're going to line this up with the cross pin hole. We'll put our cross pin in, put our keeper pin back in so that the cross pin can't come out, and we are ready to start putting things back together. All right, so pin hole punch. This is the pin end, so you just make sure you're obviously not putting it in the wrong way. That's where your pin's got to go. This should very slide in. Oops, I guess we gotta line it up, don't we? There you go. Almost did it. Slide it in, and this should line right up. So now all we're gonna do is find our pin punch at the top. We're gonna stick our pin back in here. This is actually where I will reuse, and why I keep these, the pin from one of the older ones. Nice, easy to start with. Okay, so we got it started. Make sure our pin is lined up. Okay, see, it won't come out now. Just hammer it the rest of the way back in. And there you go. Pins in, lockers in. We now have ourselves a front locker. So from here, I'm going to put the ring gear back on in the same position. Put that back together. Go back, put this back in the Jeep, and start reassembling. Make sure you have a Torq wrench. Make sure you know what those are. I'll put these, I'm going to put both the sizes of sockets and wrenches, whatever I use, as well as torque settings for each of the bolts or any bolts that I take out and have to put back. All right, so we got it back in all together, and I'm gonna tighten down the bearing caps. Like I said, I'll have all of the torque specs for the ring gear bolts, as well as these bearing caps, and then any of the others as we go. The ring gears were 80 foot-pounds and these are 60 foot-pounds, so not a big deal. This will go back together and we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so the front diff has been put back together. Cleaned up all the old sealant, put new RTV sealant on the diff cover. I believe you see that. So we are cleaned up, ready to go. I am going to start reassembling these outers and get things back up. So as we go to do this, what's going to end up happening is I'll stick the axle shaft in, and then the backing plate, the wheel bearing, and then just work our way back out basically from the inside out. So axle shafts first, and all the rest will go after it. We're actually going camping tomorrow. It's 9 p.m. tonight, and here we are doing the Jeep life. Alright, so I apologize, this video is probably going to be just a little bit short, and you're probably going to see some gaps in not necessarily putting everything back together. That said, I started this project 2 days ago with the intent, working after work like everybody else has their full-time job, to get it done quickly, an evening, maybe two. It generally doesn't take that long. Like most Jeep projects, pretty much every Jeep owner will tell you it's always an adventure, but we had a couple things that kept me from getting it done quicker. The passenger side ABS broke off into the wheel bearing, so at that point then it became replacing wheel bearings, so you have to separate the wheel bearings from the axle shafts. Not that big of a deal, but just more time. I'm good to go now, so everything's back together. I'm just getting ready to put some gear oil back into the differential, and as I've said a couple times, I'll make sure and put everything in the comments. So the upside is I am leaving out of here in a couple hours to go